Our next speaker is Bill Uihlein. And I know all of you here in the Southeast know Bill better than I do because he is spent a great deal of his career here in the Southeast. And even though I've never had the chance to work with him in any direct way, I've heard him speak on numerous occasions and know he's a very gifted speaker and a very thoughtful individual, and I always come away learning something new, and I'm sure you will today as well. He's currently the Assistant Regional Director for Science Application in the Southeast region. He spent a lot of his time and work on landscape assessments, ecosystem modeling, and the bird side of the world. Dr. Uihlein has a PhD from Mississippi State University, and thank you for sharing some time up here this morning.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. First of all, definitely appreciate the opportunity to come and talk and share some thoughts and ideas with you today. My task, the responsibility, was to think about the disruptive changes and the implications to fish and wildlife themselves. And so what I wanted to do is start the presentation off with a quote that came from Admiral Locklear just a month ago. He said that the world we're living in today is undergoing as rapid a change as any in the history of mankind. Everything necessary to support the world's population is changing at incredible rates, causing increased pressure on the planet, the environment, society, and individuals in general. Now, I know that Admiral Locklear was probably not speaking specifically to fish and wildlife, but we don't have to go very far to be able to see similar quotes that we're living with within our discipline. Conservation community faces unprecedented issues of scale, pace, and complexity in sustaining our natural resources. And the conservation challenges of the 21st century represent a force of change more far-reaching and consequential than any previously encountered. And we've encountered some pretty significant changes. Now, I don't know if any of you have sat and been in some presentations with Virginia Burkett. Great gal, USGS. Man, when she talks, if you've seen any of her presentations on climate change, I'll tell you what, you leave that conversation feeling like the angel of death has just visited you. Really. I'm not going to do that. We're not going to do that. So I just promise you right now we're not going to get onto those kinds of things. Instead, I want to then draw from another recent quote and really use this to help think about the foundation. It's basically Tony Dungy, former Super Bowl champ of the Indianapolis Colts, head coach. Basically, you can read it there. It says, the first step towards creating an improved future is developing the ability to envision it. Vision will ignite the fire of passion that fuels our commitment to do whatever it takes to achieve excellence. Our vision allows us to transform dreams of greatness into reality of achievement through human actions. Vision has no boundaries and no limits. Our vision is what we become in life. Now, Tony Dungy is talking to us. If you ever had a chance to read any of his stuff, it's really inspiring, his quiet strength and mentor leadership. He's talking about us as individuals and us trying to capitalize those God-given talents to achieve what we can envision. Well, thinking about that and thinking about the future of fish and wildlife, what is the vision and the future of fish and wildlife? And so what I'm going to talk about, by and large today, is not specifically the impacts to fish and wildlife as much as it is the impacts and that history has shown is the perpetual driver of disruptive innovation in fish and wildlife agencies. So I'm going to hit on both of those things as we talk today. And of course bring up the obvious that the fish and wildlife agencies of today that we all work for are not the fish and wildlife agencies of yesterday, nor will they be the fish and wildlife agencies of tomorrow. The question is where will we be and where will we be going? What are we envisioning and what vision can our leaders of our fish and wildlife agencies move us in that direction? So the objectives are twofold. Number one is to really reinforce how disruptive changes are resculpturing that landscape on which fish and wildlife depend, and reinforce how disruptive changes are the forces that can and do transform conservation and the agencies entrusted with fish and wildlife resources. So I'm going to do that by covering a few things here. What is resculpturing that landscape? Urban patterns, wind growth, solar energy, oil and gas development, climate change, and water stress. Now, I'm not going to get into these things in any great detail, obviously, but I want to highlight a little bit of those and how that's changing and disrupting that landscape, and ask how we as conservation, fish and wildlife agencies are going to transform to deal with those changing pressures. So, quick disclaimer, I'm not going to do the obvious. I'm not going to sit there and say oil and wildlife don't mix. I'm not going to talk about birds and bats don't fare well with blenders. I'm not going to talk about how hot plus dry equals death. We know the impacts of fish and wildlife themselves to these pressures, so we're not going to get into that part of it. Again, we're going to focus on the changes, how we're responding, and how we need to respond. So, we've all seen all the graphics and heard over the last day or two the urban growth. And there's some pictures of the urban growth model, or the urban growth projections and past based on housing density from 1940 up to and projected into 2030. That system's changing. And as we've talked about, it's basically moving wildlife off of that landscape. But it's not just the urban growth, it's not just losing the habitat, it's the individuals and the value systems and and how far disconnected we are from as a society in this urban world. And it's important to help us think about that urban growth and that change and what it's doing to and the pressures. So when we think about that urban growth, we see the model, we can talk about, of all 50 states, 4 of them are in the southeast, are among the top 10, and 1 of them is really close on that border. And as we think about each of these things, we think about the increased pressures that these will have and demands on other resources on the landscape. We have 3 that are between 20 and 30% increase. This is the expected increase between 2000 and 2030. 3 others are in double digits. 3 are Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas are in the lower digits. And of all of the southeastern states, only 1, West Virginia, is anticipated to actually lose or have a reduction in population. So all of those have implications to the resources on the landscape. Second is we can be thinking about by 2030 a couple of other things. Really interesting here, and we saw some of that yesterday, Georgia and Texas have this pretty significant shift in terms of what makes up their societies, their people. You have the highest percentage of the young, the youth, less than 18, and the lowest percentage of the older folks, which about that time I'm going to be getting really close to there. Bottom line is the shift in demographics, and you can see that age structure. And what does that mean to the future of fish and wildlife? West Virginia is also among those that will have a much smaller percent of seniors. Oklahoma, it has the second lowest percentage, but look at that change, 66% change from where we are today to the, and that's going to shape that entire state. Finally, as we all know, or expect anyway, Florida will continue to have the highest percent of over 45. So, all of those, that growing pressure, that large expanding populations redistributing, the Southeast has the, if it's not the highest, it's competing with the Northwest in terms of the highest overall movement and redistribution of individuals as well as birth rate. All of those are expecting and wanting and needing resources off the landscape. So now let's just highlight a couple of these things. The wind energy, solar energy, and oil and gas development. Of course, we all know that the world is growing at a rapid rate, and it's demanding more and more resources. And there are 2 things that we need to be thinking about in terms of disruptive change as it relates to energy development, in that it's spawning direction and innovation. One is where the U.S. has taken steps to try to reduce its dependency on foreign oil. The graphic here illustrates how we spent annually a trillion plus dollars on some of the most volatile nations in the world. We're pulling the energy out of their system to develop ours. So the question is how can we become more independent of foreign oil, which means we're going to be extracting more from our own resources. The second is green energy and the desire for green energy, or at least the incentives to move in that direction. So the point here is the disruptive change is that it's spawning disruptive innovation in that it's asking us to figure out how to extract more resources from our own soils. And that's being reinforced through the political arena, with President Obama at his last State of the Union said, "I challenge you to join me in setting a new goal. By 2035, 80% of America's energy will come from clean energy sources. Some folks want wind, some want solar, others want nuclear, clean coal, and natural gas. To meet them, we need them all." So the point here is that we're asking, as a nation, to figure out how to extract more of these resources of all different kinds off the landscape. So let's take a quick look at these things. We know the history and understand oil and gas development, so I'm only going to highlight kind of the new developments here. Demand of electricity in the U.S. has increased 136% since '70. Global demand of energy is estimated to increase 35% by 2035. What's most important is in the last 2 decades, there has been tremendous and dramatic shifts in energy extraction from gas towards gas. And specifically, the development, and this quote, "the development of shale gas plays has become a game changer for U.S. natural gas market and the hydrofracking." And only some of our states are experiencing that right now, but the technology and the innovation has really changed the game to be able to extract that gas, or that natural gas that is trapped in the shale. And it's expected to move up higher and higher in terms of percent of meeting our energy demands. Now, what does that mean to fish and wildlife? Without getting into the details, and a lot of you are, but it definitely has a footprint, fairly large footprint, and can have a large footprint like this photo from Pennsylvania. And in 2009, shale gas made up 14% of the gas supply produced, and it's expected to increase 45%. The point here in the bottom, in the red highlight, is that somebody is envisioning and developing a vision for how much energy we should be expecting from this type of development. And so in the darker reds up on the screen, those are some of the shale deposits that are being explored for energy extraction. And they do have a significant footprint and will have a significant footprint on both the landscape and the water resources that they demand. Wind energy. Wind energy is the fastest growing source of energy in the world currently. In the U.S., you can see the statistics, how quickly it's changed over the past decade. U.S. passed Germany in 2008, becoming number 2 globally, second only to China. And again, painting a vision for the future. The folks in the energy, in wind energy arena, in Department of Energy, only 2.3% of our energy came from wind, but it's envisioned that by 2030, 20%. The footprint is pretty significant. Southeast, by and large, has been somewhat sheltered from that, although there are 5 states in the Southeast that have been impacted to some level by wind energy development. I'm told by the Fish and Wildlife Service Regional Energy Coordinator that technology is this far, and innovation just this far from really being able to bring a lot more wind energy development to the Southeast in terms of being able to capitalize on the lower energy levels here in development in the turbines. Bottom line is that they have a significant and can have a significant footprint. This particular one in Texas is the largest. It covers an area the size of Manhattan. That is enormous, just phenomenal. Solar energy. By and large, Southeast, we're somewhat immune to solar energy development, but not completely. It has increased at a record pace in the U.S. and throughout the world. In 2008, solar energy expanded at an average pace of 40% per year. In this table here, you'll see the list of southeast states where some solar energy development has taken place. Florida being number one among, even though it's tiny relative to the overall development in the U.S. But the footprint can be pretty significant, like this fairly new facility in Florida, 180 acres. It's over a quarter section. Bottom line is they've got a vision for energy development as well. Solar energy could grow to meet 10% of the nation's power needs by 2025. Finally, climate change and a changing climate. The climate is changing, as Ron Cease would say. It always has, and it always will. The question is can we predict how it's changing, and can we incorporate that information in the decisions? From information from the recent Forest Futures Project, all but 2 southern capital cities have experienced statistically significant change in temperatures, annual average temperature, and all of the forecast models that they used in their assessment indicate an increased trend. Precipitation was a little more variable in terms of the various climate models. Bottom line is that of the models that they were exploring in the Forest Futures Project, we can see some variation because it matters where and how much. The question is can we utilize that information, or how can we utilize that information in resource management decisions? In that Forest Futures document, if you haven't read it, I encourage you to look at it and think about it in the context of wildlife futures. What is the wildlife futures? Finally, economics. That's a huge driver of change and impacts all of us. A week and a half ago, I sent an email out to a couple of folks in some states and got some numbers on how finances have been impacting, and the economic downturn has impacted their state agencies. Real cursory, this is not any, when you see these numbers, take nothing from them other than recognizing that there are implications, and we all understand that. In the state of Louisiana, it's definitely had a decrease in resources. However, they've set up a conservation fund. Their Congress has set up a fund that allows them to hedge and use resources to be able to try to buffer some of the effects, but they have lost, this is just in the Office of Wildlife, 6 positions since 2008, and the Florida Wildlife Commission has had a reduction of 20% in their funding. TWRA, 20% or 22 individuals have been lost, with holding 50 positions vacant. Look at Texas Parks and Wildlife and Georgia, significant 21 and 31% reduction in funding in some funding sources. FTEs down over 100. Georgia experienced 70 in 1 year. That is, and we're thinking about sustaining fish and wildlife and how we're going to go about doing that when we're getting these impacts on this side and that side. Missouri Department of Conservation, a 5% reduction, but they've got an FTE and vacancy reduction at 174, and the big hit is South Carolina with a 42% reduction in their state appropriations, losing 165 or down 167 FTEs and holding 90 vacants. That is huge, significant numbers. Now, don't misinterpret these things to be this is the answers, because there's a lot of things behind all this, and this was just a quick email response. You all understand the implications within your states a whole lot more than I do, or would even begin to present. Bottom line is all of these pressures are impacting the fish and wildlife resources. But I want to flip that around and think about it in the context of the perpetual driver of disruptive innovation within our organizations. This isn't the first time, nor will it be the last, that we've experienced some challenges. And we've made some advances in technology, conservation theory, decision theory. Those kinds of things have allowed us to try to bring more innovation to sustaining fish and wildlife resources. And we're not alone in this. If you look at an IBM report on global CEOs, they are also experiencing that. Organizations are bombarded by change, and many are struggling to keep up. 8 of 10 see significant change ahead, and the gap between the change they're experiencing and their ability to manage it has more than tripled in less than 2 years. Nearly all CEOs are adapting their business models. They're look at that bottom line that I've changing their enterprise models to be more collaborative. It sounds very familiar, doesn't it? And they've also noted that the outperforming CEOs or companies are introducing more disruptive change within their organizations to help spawn innovation. So, Fish and Wildlife, thinking about it, we have experienced hard times before, and we have introduced ways to adapt. I won't get into much details here because I know that speakers following me will talk more about and highlight some of the successes. But it's not new to us. We've made tremendous progress in the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, the state wildlife action plans, state forestry plans now, action plans, national fish, a lot of innovation there. And so what I want to do is highlight some of the innovation there and contrast that with what we just talked about just a second ago. So here is a brief snapshot in thinking about the conservation future, or the landscape of the future, and what that might look like. Basically assimilated from your states a quick list of GIS files that said these are your highest conservation priority areas. Let me just clarify what you're looking at real quick. As the data came in, I coded them green. I colored them green because it can get real busy, because green is good. However, some of the data came in that indicated it was aquatic, so I changed the ones that were really clearly aquatic, I changed to blue. Bottom line is, don't interpret anything from this other than I picked a color for these things, and there may be some stacked on top of each other, and in some cases I simplified, like Florida has 5 different priority area rankings, and I just took the highest priority. They're not the only state wildlife action plans. You also have migratory bird joint ventures. These are their highest priority areas, as well as the quail plan. TNC portfolio sites and Southeast aquatic. Now what I want to do, think about all of those 4 things right there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop on top of those different energy things, and we're going to think about it in terms of how those things line up. So next button I push, you're going to see those priorities for those different sectors of our conservation enterprise overlaying on top of those. It's get busy and dizzy. I mean, it's going to get a little bit confusing, but just watch. The more red that goes away, the more of an overlap and contrast interaction that there could be having between your conservation priorities as well as the priorities being sought by the energy developing community. So you can see with the SARP geography, almost a lot of that red goes away in terms of the oil and gas development. In terms of solar energy, in terms of wind energy, and what you see here, everything else is shut off on there except for the highest threats, if you will. And then I dropped on top of there the state wildlife priority areas. And as you can see, there's a significant challenge that we face here, which we already know a lot of this. The question is how and what are we doing about it? How can we incorporate this information into the decisions for tomorrow? What are we doing today that will, as we heard yesterday, it's important what we do today in defining what happens tomorrow. And the system is changing, there's no doubt about it in all ways. And what can we do to paint a vision for conservation in the future? And with that, I appreciate your time.
No, don't go away. So we actually do have a time for 1 or 2 questions if there are any. I told you Bill would bring us a very thoughtful paper, and he has this morning. Does anybody want to ask a question or share a comment? Yes, sir.
Bill, have you thought about the economic revenues that could be generated by humankind, like we talked the other night? Civilian contributions, not another tax, but basically the Missouri model, where a small fraction of all sales are going to contribution. Everybody breathes air, everybody drinks water. It's just not duck hunters anymore trying to support all this. How can we bring to bear humankind in North America sharing the cost of conservation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's probably one best left to the previous speaker. Yeah, you think about the history of the North American model, and early on when state game and fish agencies were first developed, they were developed using state appropriations. And you know, ultimately coming to, like, say, the Pittman-Robertson and those things where we were starting to use funds and licenses, it switched from the states said, oh, you guys got your own funds, we won't do general appropriations. I think that's wrong. If the public trust doctrine tells us that fish and wildlife belong to the people and are held in trust by the government, state and federal, for the future generations of Americans, then every one of those individuals need to and expect us to ensure the future of those resources. And in my mind, they all should be investing in them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.